Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the study. Now, in this lecture, we talk about the nature and capital. I think from the Great Learning, which is one of the chapters of the Book of Rights, we know that the factor of productions include labor, land, and capital. And we also know from the previous lecture that there is a logical sequence between them. We said only after attracting people by virtue can the land be secured. Now, simply because land is not productive unless it is operated by people with skills, right? Also, since land represents the place where people can establish their occupation and livelihood, land is not only physical space, but also all kinds of non-physical space where people work. For example, teachers work in the field of education, bankers work in the field of financial services, and doctors work in the field of health science. So even a small region with very little land can produce enormous GDP if these non-physical land are well cultivated. So if we consider the very strict sense of physical land, we must include all natural resources in our discussion. So in this lecture, we'll explore the ancient teaching in dealing with the nature in a more general sense. And after that, we'll study the final factor of production, capital. In traditional Chinese philosophy, an exhaustive classification of natural forces is represented by the 5 elements, and they are water, fire, wood, metal, and earth. Now, the functionality and operation of these 5 elements in traditional Chinese philosophy is, in fact, much broader than is modern explanation of, let's say, the atomic and molecular structure. Now, some of you may have heard about the concept of generating and overcoming interaction between the 5 elements. In modern language, it simply means the balance of the natural ecosystem or the sustainable continuity of the nature itself. In the teaching of a Flower Ornament Sutra or scripture, the Venerable Master Ching Kung mentioned that the interaction between the 5 elements forms the balance of nature. The nature is not only about the material world, but also, the world which perishes, right, through time, but also ethics, which transcend time and space. And the Master also mentioned the ethics is not man-made rule. It's simply the inner nature of human. So in the material world, the nature has its own rule of operation, and when these rules are broken, the negative consequence will take effect. But likewise, in the immaterial world of ethics, the cause and effect work just the same way. So when we conduct our lives in an unethical way, it is only a matter of time that the bad consequence will catch up. So for the purpose of this particular course, we'll only focus on the material side of the 5 elements. The 5 elements were, given a huge importance by both Confucius and ancient government. In the canon of history, there is a particular chapter called the Great Plan. And the Great Plan, as we said before, sets out important laws of governance, and it can be seen as some kind of constitution of modern legal system. In the Great Plan, it has 9 divisions. Well, the first division is about the 5 elements. So, clearly, the ancient government 2,500 years ago recognized the importance of these factors of production. Now, leaving aside the physical characteristics of these 5 elements, which is well covered in material science, we notice that the principle of the five elements is closely related to Confucius' governing principle, namely the principle of equality. Why is that? Well, in the Spring and Autumn Annal, it's recorded that Zi Han, who was the prime minister of Song, commented that heaven has produced the five elements which supply men's requirements, and the people use them all. Not one of them can be dispensed with. Also, the great commentary of the Canon of History explains that water and fire are used by people in cooking, right? Metal and wood are made into tools by which people labor. The earth is the thing upon which life of everything depends. Now, earth is not only the ground below our feet, but also construction materials that form our dwellings. It says all of these things give their utilities to men. Now, if we think about this, the five elements are crucial, absolutely crucial to human survival. But they are originally free goods, right? Simply because they are produced by nature. So the philosophical argument here is that people should have relatively equal access to these elements. So this is where the idea of equality comes in. We can also call it, universal access to natural resources. But look, universal access does not mean a simple equal share for all at once, right? Firstly, it's technologically impossible. And secondly, not everybody necessarily requires the same amounts of resource. The universal access to resources is a concept that involves both time and space. And this requires intensive human management to make sure that resources are utilized efficiently and preserved for future generations. This is obviously and necessarily the job of the government, and we'll explore that in this lecture.